Watching News at Prime, let's get into this conversation now. Agriculture Minister John Steenhuisen says various falsehoods that are being spread by certain individuals related to the department's BEE policies are damaging the country's transformation agenda. He says he's determined to set the record straight after remarks in the media pertaining to the establishment of a so-called transformation fund and on the imposition of hard statutory levies. Well, the Minister is my guest now, and he joins us from Cape Town this evening. Minister, good evening to you, and thanks for your time. Can I start with the numbers, the labour force survey numbers that came out today? And if those figures, I read them correctly, 29,000 jobs lost in the agricultural sector in the fourth quarter. What do you attribute those losses to?
Well, I think it's important to remember that a lot of jobs in the agricultural sector are seasonal, and so obviously they fluctuate between harvest and different other periods of the life cycle of the various crops. So they will fluctuate, and I have no doubt that the next set of figures will clearly take into account the harvest season and ploughing season, and we'll start to see an improvement there. But without a doubt, we've got to do a lot more to improve the number of jobs and the length and time of jobs in the agri space, and certainly that's what the department's committed to doing.
So let's talk about the matter at hand then. Today you called a media briefing to address what you say are falsehoods. Let me start here. Do you believe that South Africa's transformation policies and laws are being used by some interest groups to try to curry favor with the new Trump administration in the United States?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I'm certainly sure that they're being used for political campaigns and certainly for fundraising campaigns. If the latest Sakelicha campaign against myself is anything to go by, what you do is the modus operandi is clear. You take a few facts, you then weave your own narrative in with them, and then you go and whip up outrage and try and convince people that you're the only organization that can protect them from these terrible things that are taking place. And that certainly seems to me be behind what Sakelicha has done in this particular instance, because even when one scratches the surface, one can see that the allegations made that they're making against me are simply not founded in truth, but also they're undermining programs that are industry-led that are actually really starting to make a big difference in the agricultural space and ensuring we have a greater equality of opportunity and fairness in the agricultural space. And this is absolutely essential if one looks at the figures that are released almost annually now, which shows the very low participation rates of previously disadvantaged South Africans in the agri space. And the precise initiatives being done under the statutory levy system focus on giving people a hand up, not a hand out, and allow them to become participants and have fair access to our agricultural markets. They don't take away from anybody. It's about growing the sector. And that's what disappoints me about the nitpicking that Sakelicha have chosen over this particular matter.
That modus operandi by Sakelicha, do you believe it mirrors exactly what AfriForum and Solidarity have been doing?
Well, I can't comment on AfriForum and Solidarity. I think that these are organizations that have their own membership and they must account for that. I haven't seen a campaign to the level at which Sakelicha is running by any of these particular organizations, where information is fundamentally manipulated in order to try and create a narrative. But certainly I've made it very clear that wherever there is misinformation in the agricultural sector, I intend to put the facts on the table and let people decide for themselves where the truth lies in these matters. And this is fundamentally important because the misinformation that's been spread by Sakelicha particularly should concern their donors, it should concern their members, because what they're essentially criticizing is a genuine bottom-up, industry-led, non-politically aligned initiative to be able to ensure that we create equality of opportunity in the country,
Yeah.
and they are throwing this away. So they don't like the sort of trickle-down BEE that we are all, and people have spoken about, that has had very little impact on the ground. We have elite transfer and it focuses on ownership. The type of empowerment we're talking about here is real ground-up farm gate level assistance to small emerging farmers to allow them to participate in the value chain, forgetting as well that they too pay the levies that Sakaliga are bemoaning in this particular. That everyone pays the levies, regardless of their race or their gender.
Yeah. As a political leader whose political party has a sizable following in the country, do you have a view on what AfriForum and Solidarity have been doing?
Well, as I said, AfriForum and Solidarity are organizations in their own right, and they must account for themselves. I can only account for the Democratic Alliance. And what I can say is that my view is that some of the misinformation that's found its way to the United States, which is now clearly influencing policy there, is not based in fact or in reality of what's happening on the ground. And that is my broader concern, because the biggest people that are going to suffer as a result of this will be our commercial farmers in South Africa who are exporting through AGOA, and farm workers who will lose their jobs if we are kicked out of AGOA, or if suddenly there are tariffs on South African agricultural products. So I'm not focused on AfriForum and on Solidarity and what they're doing. I'm focusing on what we need to do as a country to make sure that we keep these important trade relations and that we keep these markets open, because without them, many of our farmers and farm workers are going to find things incredibly difficult going forward.
Yeah. All right. Let's focus the attention then on what you have been trying to do today, and that is to dispel this. Your response, very clear and unambiguous, and it is that you simply cannot ignore inequality in the agricultural space. If, therefore, the manufactured outrage does end up hurting the South African economy, how should these interest groups be dealt with?
Well, I mean, I can only go out to try and put the facts on the table. And in this instance, the facts are very different to the facts that Sakaliga and Mr. Piet Leroux are spreading. They accuse me of introducing BEE into the agricultural sector, when I've made the point that that has been around since 2016 and 2017, long predating me. They then try and use as evidence that I'm trying to build up race funds by the fact that I had to gazette statutory levies. But let me make a point about these statutory levies. The statutory levies are a voluntary approach by the sectors to the department through the National Agricultural Marketing Council for levies to be put on goods and on agricultural goods. And these levies are used for market development, they're used for research, they're used for scientific advancement, improvement of genetics, looking for new markets abroad for their products in each of the 21 commodity organizations. I don't impose the tariffs. Industry approaches the ministry and says, we would like a statutory levy, and this is how we intend to use it. We indicate that some of that has to be used in order to make sure that there's a fairness and equality of opportunity within the agricultural space. Yeah. And many of the hugely admirable programs that these levies are using are things like bursaries on real farm gate assistance through enterprise development, helping farmers achieve their GAP certifications so that they can qualify for export, improving the quality of their yields and the quality of their products so that they can start to access markets. And this is essential because if you actually look at the figures, Xoli, no one can be happy with the state of inequality in South Africa. The participation of Black South African farmers in the commercial space and around those commodities averages around 10%. 90% of it is through existing players and people who've been participating for a long time. Yeah. My view is if we're going to have genuine empowerment in South Africa, it is about creating an equality of opportunity. It's bringing everybody to the same starting point. So we must equip people who were legislatively dispossessed, people who were excluded from being able to be market participants, up to the same starting point so we can then have a fair race. Yeah. And then the market will pick winners and losers. I disagree fundamentally with the other side of the spectrum that says, no, government must pick winners and losers. And that's why I focus very clearly on these equality of opportunities. If we're able to bring all farmers up to the same starting point, then we can have a fair race.
Yeah.
And the market will pick the winners and losers. But it seems like Sakelege don't want there to be an equality of outcome. But when you try and do initiatives that focus on an equality of opportunity that bring people up to the same starting point, they're equally unhappy about that as well, despite what the Constitution says about social justice and what the Constitution says very clearly about making in the equality cause, about how we've got to make sure that we are able to bring people up to the same levels of equality in the country. And it's far healthier to do it this way.
So simply then, Minister, should South Africa's laws that seek to redress the injustices of the past be defended?
Well, I think that any initiatives to make sure that we're creating an equality of opportunity is essential. Nobody can put their head in the sand in a country with a Gini coefficient of 0.63, one of the highest in the world, and say we don't have an inequality problem. But how do we address that inequality? And you have to take steps to make sure that you can move forward and address that inequality. Now, you can do it one of two ways. You can do it through elite transfers and trickle down, and I think we've seen that that hasn't worked. There's been nothing broad-based or empowering about it. Or you can start by building an equality of opportunity to ensure that every player can get to the same starting point so they can then compete fairly. And that's what's great about the levy system. It's voluntary from the sector itself. It's not run by government. I don't sit on these funds, as Sakelege seem to make out, and determine how and where they're spent and who the beneficiaries are. It's entire industry managed, and the beneficiaries thereof are selected by the industry. So there's no political cronyism that takes place. And they focus on genuine empowerment and skills transfer, knowledge transfer, giving people the means to be able to compete fairly. And I think that that is exactly the type of real, genuine, broad-based empowerment that we need in South Africa, with genuine skills transfer and allowing people to be able to compete against peers and in the sector on a fair basis.
Let me try and move the conversation forward. Soon, you are going to be heading to Washington, I think as part of the South African envoys, to try and do damage control, if you like. Firstly, do you believe that Elon Musk is largely responsible for the negativity that South Africa seems to be plunged in the White House?
Well, let me just say this, Xoli. I mean, I don't think that we can turn a blind eye to the fact that there's been over 2 decades of really poor decisions made about domestic politics, but also our international positioning. And that goes without saying. I think I've been on your show and I've spoken about our opposition to many of the policies and plans and positionings of the ANC. And I think we've seen a buildup of bad decisions and missteps. But this government is a new government, and it is the 7th administration. There's been a peaceful transfer of power through a democratic election in South Africa. We now have a new government. We're part of this government, and we're focused on growth and jobs. And I think that disinformation, no matter who it's spread by, is unhelpful in terms of our positioning there, particularly given the fact that if tariffs are put in place, particularly given the fact that if South Africa is removed from AGOA, it won't be the politicians who made those bad decisions that are held accountable and who will suffer. It won't be those people who benefited from the 9 wasted years of corruption and state capture who suffer. It'll be our farmers and farm workers and our manufacturers and factory workers who will bear the brunt of it. And that cannot be right. And so we intend to speak to whoever it takes in the United States to be able to put the facts on the table and say, look, you're an independent country. You must make your own decisions, but you must make them on the base of the facts. And the facts are that there's no mass expropriation of land taking place in South Africa at all. It's just simply not true.
Yeah.
And no government should base and judge South Africa on the basis of misinformation. And it's that we need to get to the bottom of how we can address that and how we can deal with some of the genuine issues the US may have with us. We may have genuine issues with some of the things that they're doing. Yeah. But it's about making sure that we maintain the relationship that is so fundamentally important for our trade and for, I believe, global politics as well.
John, as a politician, I'd like to ask you this question. Never before, of course, I'm young, but I've yet to read any history where the United States government has ever focused so much attention on one country, and part of that is around its laws. Why is South Africa receiving so much attention from this new Trump administration, in your view?
Well, I think because we're in the crosshairs because of some very poor decisions that have been made in the past. I think that there's an unhappiness clearly around the RCJ case. There's an unhappiness clearly about the inclusion of Iran and BRICS. There's an unhappiness clearly about some of the positioning with Russia. And that's America's position. Our job now has to be to go and dispel that. We haven't always had a negative relation. We have been in America's sights before. We were very much in America's sights under apartheid when Congress and others were moving very determinedly to put pressure on the South African government and on South Africa to walk away from some of those terrible apartheid era practices and to end apartheid and to allow democratic elections. We were on America's agenda when it came to the fight against HIV and AIDS. And had it not been for the PEPFAR program, millions of young South Africans and others would have been condemned to die a terrible fate due to HIV/AIDS. Had it not been the attention that they focused there. So we need to get back onto the right page with our allies and to make sure that we understand that we do need each other. It's in America's interest as well, I might add, to have a strong, stable constitutional democracy on the southern tip of Africa, particularly given the way some of the countries on the continent are heading away from democracy and towards authoritarianism. I don't think it's in America's interest to have a South Africa which they don't have a good relationship with as well. And I think we need to impress upon them that this is a new government. It's a democratic government. It's a result of a democratic outcome, just as theirs is, and that they need to make sure that we are able to maintain good relations from a trade perspective, but also from a geopolitical perspective as well.
All right. I'm very short on time. Can I ask you two quick questions? If South Africa is being punished for taking Israel to the ICJ, should the country prepare to take the pain for the next 4 years? Or might you suggest that we change course at the ICJ?
Well, it's impossible to change course at the ICJ. The case is in, it's being heard, no matter what your views and opinions of it, and I mean, we've expressed many of those going into the election. We have to now await the verdict of it. But I do think South Africa needs to reorient itself. If we're going to say that we are non-aligned, then fully we genuinely have to be non-aligned. And it means that we must take a far more pragmatic approach to foreign relations. It's possible, for instance, for Narendra Modi, the Premier of India, to be a member of BRICS, but also to be able to attend the BRICS summit without leaving saying that Vladimir Putin is a good friend of India, and is able to then also travel to the United States and deal with the Trump White House. I think we also need to be genuinely non-aligned, but also a lot more pragmatic in how we approach foreign relations if we are to put South Africa's interests first. We shouldn't be used to fight other people's battles. We should be going into every particular situation saying, like India does, what is in the best interest of South Africa in this particular position, and how do we position ourselves accordingly? And I think that we will avoid a lot of the headwinds that we're facing now if we do that as the 7th administration.
Finally, I can't let you go without asking about Roman Kabanek. Is this still your chief of staff?
Oh, you and Clement Mandela obsessed about it.
Well, you've got to tell the nation.
Did Clement put you up to this?
No, never. It's my own independent question to you. Is he still your chief of staff? And if so, what are you doing about it?
So, as you know, I asked him to step down about 4 months ago. I accepted and I took the responsibility that I had made an error in appointing him. He's refused to step down. And as a result, there's been a human resource process. And these things drag on maddeningly, but I'm very confident that the matter is coming to a close. And I'm sure that within the next little while, we'll be able to make an announcement in that regard. But believe you me, it's as equally frustrating for me as I'm sure it is for all of you waiting for a final conclusion on that. But I promise you, you and Clement will be the first to know when the matter has been concluded.
Minister, I thank you very much for your time. Good to talk to you. The Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen.